This is the foot brake air valve in a 1976 Bedford bus, but these were also used in TKs and a number of other Bedfords. And today we're going to pull this apart, clean it and reassemble it. And the reason we do that is because over time these suck in rust scald or rust flakes, moisture and all sorts of things, and it can wear out all the seals. So if you service them, they'll last a long time. So we'll start by releasing our air gauges. So we're looking at the front of it now. This is the input shaft from the brake pedal, and what we're going to do is release these 3 bolts off here. I don't really want to have to detach the housing off the bus chassis because it's inside the engine bay and it's really hard to get at. Now there's a bunch of springs and things in the back here which you need to keep an eye on. There we go. And this is the part we are going to service. The front part, the housing's still sitting in place. Now we can leave that there and easy enough clean that. If we slide that back, this piston here will slide out of the housing and we can leave the actual brake rod there. You see in the back there, we can pull out this bit here and we can give that a clean up too. It looks pretty good. Okay, in this video we're going to do a tear down on our brake foot valve out of our Bedford. I have rebuilt this, but I'm doing this as a tear down so you guys can understand how it comes apart and how it goes back together. So let's get started. So the first thing you want to do is we're going to remove the exhaust valve out of the back here, and there is a circlip in here which you just squeeze out like that, and then there's the exhaust valve flap on the back which has just popped out, and in here there is a little O-ring, and that O-ring seals against, there is a piston in here, so this washer normally lives in here and pinches that O-ring in place. Then there is a spring, and then there is a valve, and that's the valve sealing surface which seats down in here. So that little O-ring that we were talking about before runs on that surface in here and seals, runs up and down here during normal operation, because this goes in and out of this housing. Now in here there is a filter. This will need to be cleaned. Just use a toothbrush. Don't use petrol or brake cleaner on it because you could make it brittle. Your one could have quite a bit of rubbish in it. Now what we're going to do is remove this piston. So as I was saying, we're going to remove this piston out of here, and there's sort of two sections in here. We'll remove the piston first and then we can get the rest of a section out of there. But what you want to do, there's 2 sealing surfaces here, don't damage those. There, that is a sealing surface, and so is that one in there. But if we look down the middle, that's our target zone down there. We want to drop long screwdriver down there in the middle, and then if we give that a push, that will bring out the main brake plunger. So that guy there. So as you see, this has got rubber grease over it, or brake grease, to keep things lubricated up. Now the next section we want to get out is this guy in here. There is like a spring-loaded ring in there which forces back onto this. We don't necessarily need to remove that unless there's a lot of rubbish in there, but worry about that later if there is. So what we're going to do now is remove all this core out of here, and that is done by pushing on this inner sealing surface here, and it should come out as the one assembly. Now when you push on that, push on it with something plastic. Don't use metal because you don't want to damage that sealing surface, because that sealing surface runs on that little rubber valve there. So if we give a push on there and watch what's happening in here, let's get it started. There we go, moved a little bit. So there we go, that comes out of there by pushing on that bit down the middle there. And if we withdraw that, there's 3 seals in there, plus a piston, which is actually attached to the back of this because of my rubber grease. That may all fall out separately. So we've got that assembly, and this assembly here too. So I've just gone and changed out my cloth underneath because I wanted that super clean, because I don't want any contaminants getting on this nice clean foot brake valve. And I've added in 2 extra parts here. So this is the part that came out of it when we took it out of the vehicle, plus that guy. So everything's laid out in a logical order here. So we've got all these 3 pieces out now, and they actually sit down in the middle there. Now that is fully disassembled. Well, not quite actually. There's another little bit. While we've got a bunch of O-rings on there, we have, if I put that up there, we put this down here, we had our filter. We'll just lay that out the way it came out. So we've got this filter and valve here. Well, there is a repeat of this area inside here. If we have a look in here, you can see the filter just sticking through there, and it's held in place. A valve and a filter is held in there by this guy. So we'll grab our, where's it gone? Lost it. Bear with me. There it goes, it's hiding over there. So what we're going to do is take the circlip out of here. Circlip is out. Now this, you'll notice some similarities between these two. There's a little O-ring in here. There's also a little O-ring that sits underneath this washer in here too, because that little O-ring seals on this spring assembly in here, same as before. And then, so that O-ring is the main seal around the back there. We have a little filter housing that goes in there too. So that is essentially what is in the foot brake valve in the old Bedford. So this is the bit where I insert the video here on how this works, how the mechanism actually works. So watch that. It's a bit complicated, but I think I managed to figure it out. I think I can probably explain it to you, but you have a look and see what you think. Okay, I'm going to try and explain to you how this all works. I've been sitting here for 20 minutes and I figured it out. So as I was saying, this brake system is partitioned. So everything from my hand to the right is the front part of the partition, and that works independent of everything on the back. So if you have a problem and you lose the front part, you can still apply the brakes using the back half of the partition. Double redundancy. Anyway, compressed air comes in this guy, and when you put your foot on the brake, it applies or lets air out here to put on the brakes. So this is in, this is out. You'll notice that this corresponds with this housing, and this housing is the brains of the circuit. See this air, this slot here? Well, when it's just sitting in the housing here, it allows air to come in here, down into here, and this part of the assembly is what allows air to pass from this area. So when this is lifted off its seat there, the seal of that seat, it allows air to pass through here, up through that little chamber there, and come out the side here and go off to the brakes. Now what controls that is this part, and this is the plunger, and this is actually hooked up to your foot brake with a rod. So when you, the brakes are released, when you put your foot on the brakes, it comes down and bottoms out, ready to, and if you push a little bit harder, it will lift this assembly off the back here. So if we have a look through the side there, you can just see it there. When you put your foot on the brake, it lifts that up. You can see that happening through that little slot on the left. And when you lift that up, it allows air to rush down here, through the gap in there, and come out here, and it applies the brakes. Now, because there's a spring in here, and there's meant to be a spring in behind here, which is this guy here, these springs work against each other, and they will actually cause the brakes to regulate the amount of pressure that they're applied at, depending on how hard you push on here, because they work against each other and they reach an equilibrium between these two chambers. And that's it. Now, when your foot on, that's applying the brake, when the brake has reached a set amount that's adequate for how quickly you want to stop, it kicks back and sits there, so the brakes are not going on any harder or not releasing. But when you go to release the brakes, that comes out and it allows air to vent out of here. This valve's still stuck down, but it allows the air to rush out here through the little wastegate valve at the back. And that's it really, just this little system here. Simple as that. Not really, but anyway, you get the idea. And one final explanation on the operation, you'll notice that how I was talking about that, the key components for here, you notice how that looks the same as what's happening down the back here, which is a repeat of the whole system. Oops, can't quite see it. So that's the back one, this is the front one, and these are the two different partitioned systems. There you have it. So, and one last thing, so air comes in both of these. The air cannot mix between the two, and the air comes out of here independent through these two different circuits. Voila. Just want to point out one thing here while you're disassembling this. There is one thing you may not necessarily have to pull apart, and it's this guy here, which sits down in here and is held in by this little clip, which is like a little spring by that guy there, and that's held in down here. Compress that right down into there, and then that little clip gets wedged in around the back here. You don't necessarily need to take that out. The only reason I took it out was it enabled me to clean this assembly a lot better. First things, what we're going to do is turn this housing over and reassemble our little plunger in there for the brake system. Now that guy sits, there's a seat in here, you want to make sure that's clean and make sure there's no bits of rust or anything stuck on the front surface there. So plunger goes in, spring goes in, then what we've got is your filter housing, air filter, drops around the outside there, which you can see through the side. Next thing is we have our little nylon back here, and we have a little O-ring in here. Now this O-ring sits down in here, and then we have our washer which sits in here, and that sandwiches the O-ring so it can't move anywhere, because that O-ring, if I take this little plunger out, as it's operating, it moves in and out and seals on that O-ring in there. That's really important that it actually does that. So we'll drop that in there, drop our spring in. Also make sure you've got the little cup washer on here too. Drop that into there. I'm shaking a bit because it's freezing out here. Alright, so we're going to drop this in here, but we need this O-ring. So just put a bit of rubber grease on that. That O-ring is going to seal in here, but we'll actually run it around the outside of here, because that will seal this chamber in here. So watch this doesn't all fall out when you drop it over the top, like so, down onto there. Now got it resting there. What we're going to do is just gently push it down into there until it stops, and then we're going to grab our clip, drop our clip in there, and find circlip pliers. There we go, so that's in there. So that's all sealed up in there nicely. Now you can actually see the back of that seat down the middle there that we've just put in on that valve. And you've got the filter through the side, because this moves in and out on that sealing surface there. Now if we put this front plunger in, check your seals in there, it's got to have a seal in there, and a big seal on the back here. That plunger seals on here down this bore, and also seals on this surface against the back of that valve seat down the back there, the black rubber one. So drop that down there, and when you apply the brakes, your foot pushes on here, this pushes up, and then give it a good push and it will apply the brakes. There you go, so that's that little valve come out the back. So that's part of that mechanism, which I should have probably explained in the section before this. So that's all done. Next one is this guy over here. So this is second plunger, which is similar to this one. Got an O-ring on there, check and clean, reapply your rubber grease, and there's another O-ring in here, and that seals on the surface way down in the middle there. See that opening? That's where this runs on. So what we're going to do now is start to actually drop all of this assembly back in here. So we've got rubber grease in there, we've checked and cleaned all those bores, checked for pitting and everything like that, and that's all been good. So what we'll do first is we'll drop this guy back down the middle. We'll just start that, push it down a little bit, and we're going to put this guy in here now. Very important that you get this guy around the right way. So we've got that sitting in there. Remember the smaller end, it's got the plunger on there. I'll put that in a minute. So that bit goes into there. Just being very careful of the seals that I don't damage them while I'm putting them in. Okay, so drop that in. So all three seals have now run past, and as we push it up in here, you'll see that plunger come up through there and sit. This plunger sits just below the surface until your foot goes on the brake. And because that's plunger's sitting just below this surface here, it allows, in that state, it's actually venting. It's in a released brake state, if that makes sense. Right, so the next one is, I'm going to drop in our front plunger. That looks all good. I've got some rubber grease on there. So that guy, drop that in there. I've got that little drain hole facing down, but honestly, I don't think it matters. No, it doesn't. There we go. that's in. So when that's sitting in there, this particular one, this inner piston just sits slightly down from that outer edge. Yours probably should too. Alright, what we're going to do is fit up the valve gear in the back now. So first things first, you got your little filter. So we've got air comes in here, goes around the outside of the filter, cleans it before it can actually enter into here. Then we've got all of these bits here, so same deal as the front part, it's just a repeat. So I've got our sealing surface here, which sits on those two. Got our little cut washer, spring, just run a little bit of rubber grease on that surface to allow the O-ring to slide on it. So this is the O-ring that's going to slide up and down it when it's assembled into here. Drop that down into there. The spring goes on, and then same as before, so this is the vent or exhaust valve on the back, comes out here, got a little O-ring, just drops into here, then we've got our washer which holds it in place, and then this drops down onto here and pushes the spring down, and the O-ring will seal onto the inner part of this little cylinder here. Let's just get our little clip ready. And that fell out, so what we'll do is put a bit of rubber grease in there just to hold it in place while I get it in there. There we go. Also, don't forget there's a big O-ring on the outside here which seals against the outer surface. There we go, so that's down. Get our clip in place. Try it with my left hand, see how we go. There we go, so that's in. Check those clips, you don't want that bad boy popping out because you lose half your brakes and your air pressure. So there you go, that's your air brake foot valve reassembled. So this is the plunger which sits up in the spring that sits up in the front, and then this comes off your brake pedal in the assembly. So what we'll do is normally I'll just run a bit of rubber grease around here, and then just for sealing a little bit, keep the dust out, then I run normal blue grease on here, just a lithium, just a grease anyway, with a bit of a mixture of grease and anti-seize on that pin, just in case, because that gets a bit of weather on it sometimes. So there you have it. That's the Bedford air brake foot valve pulled apart and reassembled. Hope that's of help to someone.